Спасибо. Okay, well, thank you. I'm happy to be here in St. Petersburg and thank Open University and Skolkovo Foundation for bringing me here. Actually, we have ISEC alumni in Singularity University, so I am familiar with the program. Woohoo! Yeah. I'm excited to share with you a couple things today. One, introduce you to Singularity University. What is it? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do, how we think differently, some of the projects that our alumni are working on, and then I'm going to take the second half of the presentation and I'm going to tell you, just share some insights into tips for startups, and specifically some of the less common tips or mistakes that aren't as often discussed as I see. Quick, so I can understand the audience before we start, how many of you want to work on a startup or you already are? Okay. How many of you think you might within the next 5 years? Okay. It's a good number. And how many people here are technical, or studying a science or technology? Okay, good. Thanks. Well, first we were founded 4 years ago by Ray Kurzweil, a noted futurist, and Dr. Peter Diamandis. They're both entrepreneurs with about 15 companies each. But Ray was one of these rare people called a polymath, who was an expert in many different areas and sciences. And you don't see this as much anymore. You used to see it in the days of Da Vinci and others. But we've pushed science so far now that to move the field forward, you really have to get narrow in a very specific field, and you don't have the opportunity to study all of the adjacent fields. But Ray was a genius, is a genius, and was able to do that and published a book that highlighted some insights about how they're growing exponentially and, more importantly, how they're converging. Peter Diamandis, who founded the X Prize Foundation, which created the first Space X Prize, which was licensed by Richard Branson to become Virgin Galactic, read the book and said to Ray, we need to start a school that focuses on this type of thinking and teaching. And the corporate partners on the bottom left sponsored the first summer of the school with a founding conference that included notable Silicon Valley people like Larry Page and Vint Cerf. And the fundamental insight in Ray's book was that we know as Moore's law, which is the doubling of performance per price in computing chips, actually was not the first paradigm of accelerating returns of performance. It was actually the fifth. And so what you see on the far right is what we think of as chips, and that curve is Moore's law, but it actually extends all the way back to punch cards. And even before punch cards, the loom and the weave is actually a predecessor technology to the punch card. And Ray looked even further at this universal effect and saw extended all the way back to the history of technology. So on the far left, you have 9,000 years back in the agricultural revolution. And as technology has continued to the right, on the vertical axis is population. You see a couple of interesting things about this graph and about this graph. Two things about this one are, number one, it's remarkably smooth. So whether there's wars or there's drought, this goes back to 1900. Anything that happened in the world did not shake the technological advancement off of this curve. The second thing you may notice is that it's got an upward slope. And because it's an exponential curve, that means that the rate of acceleration is itself getting faster. And that has been consistent. Same thing here. The bend that you see in the bottom right is about the time of the Renaissance, about the time that the printing press was invented, which allowed for the widespread dissemination of information and ideas. And then as you can see, the technological advancements of automobile, telephone, germ theory, healthcare, penicillin, internet, they all get closer and closer together in time, but they also have more and more dramatic effect on the increase in population. And it's not just the increase in population, but it's the life expectancy of people in different societies, literacy rates, as well as general health and the decrease in violence that we're seeing. We may think there's a lot of violence in the world today, but historically, we're at our lowest violence levels in history. That was all backward looking. So now let's look forward. On the left side of this graph, where you see the yellow slope, that's actually the same chart from here. In 2010, what you see on this chart is the years on the bottom, and you see the number of calculations per second that you can get on a $1,000 laptop. So you purchase your $1,000 laptop, and that's how many calculations per second you can get on it. Right now, our computers are about the equivalent of a mouse brain in terms of processing power for that $1,000 laptop. 10 years ago, they were about as powerful as an insect brain. Now, what's interesting is in about 10 years, your $1,000 laptop will have the computing power equivalent to about a human brain. Slightly different types of computing power. We're very good at parallel processing. We're terrible at recall and memory and things like that. But even more interesting, by 2050, your $1,000 laptop, one of them will have the equivalent computing power of all 8 billion human brains on the planet. And we've already seen historically throughout time that nothing shakes that curve. So what will we do when we all have that much power in our laptops? How do we think about that? Basically, this is exponential thinking. And humans are not good at exponential thinking. So if I propose to you that I would take 30 linear steps across this stage, you could figure out where I would be on the other side of the stage. If I proposed that I would take 30 exponential steps, few of you would guess that I would be 26 times around the Earth. And that's because when you're doubling and you're going exponentially, our brains automatically go to linearly. And so few of us are really understanding the significance to which the recent explosion in innovation that we think we've been seeing is really just the beginning, and it's going to continue. And someone asked me today, do I think there's an entrepreneurship boom, and is it going to continue? I said, no, it's not going to continue. It's going to get faster. It's going to accelerate. And so one of the things we teach is this type of exponential thinking, because if you're creating a company, and it's going to take you 2 years, you need to think about where the technology is going to be in 2 years. And Ray Kurzweil was very good at this. Another example is from the start of time until 2003, we moved 5 exabytes of information around the internet and the planet. And the exabyte is that's 5 billion gigabytes. It took us in 2010 only 2 days to move that same amount of information around the internet. And you can see in 2013 it took 10 minutes. So right now, every minute there's 60 hours of video content added to the internet. And again, this is continuing to explode. The same is true with storage and all other things that become information enabled. And what we're going to see is actually physical goods are going that way with 3D printers as they become digitized essentially into zeros and ones until you print them out of raw material. The second guiding principle of Singularity University is interdisciplinary thinking. So exponential thinking, yes, but having expertise in one area, we teach our students the frontier of each one of these sciences and technologies, where they are, where their cost curves are going, what they can be used for, what the barriers are in each of them, and so that they can understand how to leverage them. And one of the questions we'll get is, do you need to have a PhD in robotics, or how can you teach someone robotics? We don't teach them robotics, we teach them how to use it to solve a problem for society, much the same way that I don't need to know how to build a car to understand how I can use a car to create a business, a taxi business or whatever it may be. And so these are the areas we focus on, and it's when people have a deep understanding of where each of these are and what they're capable of right now, that they can combine them in unique ways, and we challenge students to do that. The last thing we do is we ask them to focus on the world's biggest problems. At our founding conference, Larry Page was there, and he said, don't bother starting a school unless you're going to try to change the lives of 1 billion people. And so our summer program, the last 4 weeks, is our 10 to the 9th plus impact project, where we ask our students to get into groups and try to come up with a project or idea that will positively impact 1 billion people over 10 years. And I'm going to show you some of those projects. But this is one of the pillars of Singularity University. So essentially, to summarize, we try to find the most talented, brilliant people we can. We teach them exponential thinking. We teach them these interdisciplinary technologies, and we focus them on the world's biggest problems. And we've been fortunate enough to collect incredible faculty who are thought leaders in each of these areas from all over the world. We have a few programs. Our first is our graduate studies program, which is 10 weeks long. And then we have 1-week executive programs. And those are typically CEOs, CTOs, government leaders, investors, etc. I'll tell you a little bit more about who's in the graduate studies program. And then we have a 1-week healthcare focused program. And then we do custom programs around the world for different organizations. This is what the summer looks like. The first week is a deep dive into the global grand challenges, where we bring in a host of speakers to really understand what the issues are. Then we dive into 5 weeks of technologies, 160 lectures, 300 hours. It's very intense, very exhaustive. The students live right around the classroom. We have an innovation lab. Then we take people in the field in Silicon Valley to go and see these technologies in action in different companies and labs. And so we take them to Exobionics, where you can see robotic legs being built for people that are paralyzed, and biofuels companies, et cetera. And then you can see we start the 10 to the 9th plus team project for the last 4 weeks, and the students present their projects at the end of the summer. Who are the graduate studies program students? The average age is 31, but we have students that range from 18-year-olds who are working on their PhD to 50-somethings. It's not a strict requirement on age or even your school background. We're very flexible, as long as you're very smart and you can understand the technical content. Then we try to find people that are complement each other and that will have the impact we think. And that's where the other two come in. Number one is some demonstrated entrepreneurial capability. It could have been started a program or a project somewhere. And then the last one is an interest in humanities grand challenges. So in the 2012 summer program, we had students from 36 different countries. We do 80 students per program. Only about 10 of those were Americans. And we have alumni now in over 75 countries. So we're very international, and we have been from the beginning. And we have about 20 or more right now in Russia, alumni. 2012, our applications reached 4,000 or so, and so it is selective. Don't let that discourage you. Apply. Here's an exciting opportunity to come to Singularity University on a scholarship. So in 2010, we ran this test where we went to Brazil and we created a contest in partnership with some corporations and local government. And we said anybody can enter an idea that will positively impact that region of Brazil, at least 1 million people. And it was modeled after our billion. And there were 230 entries, and there was a great winner who wound up getting a full scholarship to Silicon Valley at Singularity University for the summer. It was so successful, we did it again in 2011 in 12 countries. We took 12 students. And then last summer, we did 20 students from 16 countries. This summer, we're going to be doing 23 students from 17 countries. And Skolkovo Foundation sponsored students last summer and this coming summer. The contest will be available on their website, I think, December. So check there for it. And we will be have 1 or 2 students from Russia, specifically as part of this global impact competition. In the future, we're going to continue to expand our education programs. More importantly, we're going to create an online version of our program so anyone anywhere in the world can take it. Right now, we really just do it in Silicon Valley, except for the custom ones. The other thing we're doing is rolling out global conferences where you can come experience Singularity University for about 2 days. Moscow is one of the areas we're targeting for next year, so hopefully we can get that done. And that's part of our international expansion. Finally, Singularity University Labs is where people go when they leave the classroom and they want to build a company. And this is kind of a virtual incubation program where we run programs virtually, webcasts, get companies together. We have a database. We give them vendor discounts. Our goal in Labs is to help our companies become successful. We're launching a venture fund there. And we also have memberships for corporate R&D teams. They have trouble innovating as well. And it's exciting to put the startups next to large companies who might be able to become their investors, their vendors, their partners, and ultimately the acquirers of those companies. I'm going to highlight a few projects now to kind of give you a sense of what our students are doing. This company is called GetAround, and they identified a problem of lack of utilization of cars. Cars are expensive, but they actually sit parked 92% of the time. So you're either sleeping or you're at work and the car is just sitting there, or you're shopping. So what they did was created an application on the mobile phone. They took advantage of that technological expansion of mobile, along with a Wi-Fi box in the car, that if anyone can rent their car. They can put their car up for rent. So if I see your car up for rent, as I get close to it, I can reserve it. And then this will appear on my phone once I've reserved it, and I can unlock the door. I can get in and drive, and then it's tracking how long I'm driving, and it'll charge me. And then if it's your car, you'll make the money. Get around keeps the split. And there's a blanket insurance policy. So what does this do? This increases utilization of cars because now every car around you is for rent. So people who can't afford cars have another option for an hour or a half an hour or maybe a less expensive car. You can think of places that are economically disadvantaged and only a few people in the town have a car. Well, now someone can buy a car and they can rent it out 4 days a week. You can buy a nicer car, and ultimately you have fewer cars needed for parking. And so it kind of minimizes wasted resources and gives more people access to the things they need globally through a better shared use of resources. This company is called Blue Oak Resources. And what they identified was the dark side of exponential growth of computers and mobile, which is you're going to have a lot of trash, right? Every year you need to get a new computer, you need to get a new mobile phone, it all goes in the trash. And our electronics all have valuable minerals in them, gold, others, and we're depleting those globally. So what Blue Oak did was they're using a type of bacteria to mine the precious metals out of discarded electronics. And it turns out that there is more gold in discarded electronics per kilogram than there is in gold ore. So you're actually better off mining it from discarded electronics than you are from gold ore. That company is sitting inside of Kleiner Perkins, which is probably the most well-known venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. So we're excited about them as well. This company recognized the problem as they were trying to find solutions, which was a lot of the world has either poor roads or the roads are washed out during a rainy season. So you might come up with these great solutions, but you can't get them to people. And then during kind of one of our drone sessions, they thought, well, let's look at the economics of drones today. Drones are falling on that same curve in terms of, and their performance is increasing on that same exponential curve. And so they said, what if we tied together a network of drones, and this is where they introduced artificial intelligence. So as we go back to that convergence of understanding of different sciences, and we created these stations that used artificial intelligence to tell the drones where to go and recharge them. And we could create a network that would move matter around so that the drone would come, you drop off some medicine, it would carry it to a village, and then come back or go to the next station and wait for its orders. So you could eventually create what they call, the name of the company is MatterNet. And a good analogy here is mobile phones, because Africa didn't have a landline telephone infrastructure with cables, right? The way we do in lots of parts of the world. And when the mobile phone came out, they didn't build it, they just skipped over it. And everyone has mobile phones now. And so there's a question about whether they could skip over trying to develop costly infrastructure and just use the skies. I think you'll wind up seeing a mix of that. So that's one of the drones leaving the power station. Obviously, healthcare is a great place to start because you have something that is low in weight but high in value. And right now, I believe drones are at the performance of carrying 2 kilograms, 10 kilometers. But they're falling by a factor of 2 every year. So next year, that same 2 kilograms will be able to be carried 20 kilometers. And so you can see what's going to happen year after year. And they'll get cheaper at the same time. This is them testing in Haiti. This is the drone taking pictures. Obviously, after earthquake disasters, there's poor infrastructure. You need to get things to different people. And so they're working with the government of Haiti to have it be one of the first test areas. This project was from this last summer called Med Sensations. And this team was comprised of 3 people. A software engineer from Indonesia, hardware engineer from Israel, and a Harvard medical student from the US. And they thought, what if we could somehow expand the capability of the touch of doctors? So they created what they call the tricorder glove, which basically allows you to take the kind of tests that doctors would take with their hands and feel for different things and record that data and also allow it to be transmitted over long distances in case the doctor's not there. But it also expands it because it has sonogram in the fingertips. And when you look at the cost of all of these parts coming down, that's something that you could see that most places in the world don't have enough doctors. So if you could have this kind of input, it could be very helpful. This team built this as a working prototype, actually, that's functioning, and they built it in 3 weeks. Came up with the idea and built it in 3 weeks. And so they're pursuing this company. That was an example of robotics. Actually, the drone is as well. I'm just going to talk about a couple of areas that we're really interested in. They're super exciting because right now we're coming off of a couple of decades of different types of entrepreneurship. You know, we had hardware and computers, and we had software, then the internet. Really, right now, we're riding the back of that wave into mobile and a lot of social. But because these costs have come down in so many areas, you're going to see entirely new waves of opportunity for entrepreneurs, and robotics is one of them. Low-cost sensors and parts are getting to the point now where young people without money can start doing these things, and that's where you really see the boom in innovation. And I'm going to highlight a couple of areas like that. This is one, actually, the robot on the left and the robot on the top right are both self-balancing. That means you can push them while they're walking, and they will stabilize themselves and balance. And they actually look quite lifelike when they do it. And people have a reaction when you see the person push it, almost like the person's mean. So we're getting at the point now where robots are taking on lifelike qualities. And those two are Boston Dynamics out of Boston. The one on the bottom right looks and flies like a bird, and unless you're up close, really close to it, you can't tell. They also have a hummingbird, which will fly into a building. And there are a number of swarm copters you may have seen on the internet. So this is a whole new wave that's coming, and you're going to start to see entrepreneurs go into this area more and more. I mentioned 3D printing before. You all know about 3D printers now. And the reason they're exciting is because the same way the internet took information, photographs, media, turned it into zeros and ones, it essentially became free. And there's a lot of free information on the internet. Physical goods are made up of really 3 things in terms of cost. It's the cost of the raw material. There's the cost of complexity. So how intricate is the design? And as complexity goes up, cost goes up. And the third one is inefficiency. So shipping things across the world so they can be manufactured and then shipping them back. Right? So 2 of those 3 with 3D printing are going to go to 0, which is the cost of complexity goes to 0. In fact, 3D printers now can print and manufacture things that are more complicated than we have with any other method. Plastic injection molding or anything else. And so that basically shows up in your computer in zeros and ones in an AutoCAD file. People will be sending these around. And now you can also eliminate the second cost, which is inefficiency. Because if your end user is in country X, then you'll print it from a 3D printer down the street or in your garage at some point. I think now 3D printers can print 70% of the parts to make another 3D printer. Soon we'll be at 100, so you can drop off a printer somewhere and come back a year later and there'll be a whole bunch of them all over the neighborhood. The only thing you need then is raw materials, but we're going to talk about how biotech and synthetic biology are going to allow us to manufacture those things as well, like wood and metal and other things that we need. Biotech is another huge area that we talk about that's incredibly exciting. And what you see here are 2 lines. The top one is the Moore's law that we've been talking about, which is the curve for the price performance of computer chips and how it's dropping. The black line is the curve for sequencing DNA. And DNA is just code, right? It's GATC, it's 4 nucleotides, 4 letters. Much like computer code, which is just zeros and ones, you have to read it and you can write it, which is what genetics and synthetic biology has done. Both of those costs are coming down dramatically faster than they are in computing. And so you're seeing the emergence of DIY, do-it-yourself, biotech teenagers, students. They're online, they're in these clubs. There's 2 clubs in the US now where you can join a lab for $100 a month, and it's kind of like a gym membership. You can come in and use the lab, and there's classes at night or how to do different things. One of the teachers, the youngest, is 8 years old. She teaches certain courses there. And this gentleman is one of many who have kind of created a lab in his bedroom with the cost of equipment coming down. A lot of senior technology people, veterans, are saying, if I were young today, I would go into biotech. I would be a hacker in biotech. This is another Singularity University company, and what you see on the top and the bottom is a comparison of computing as a technology on the bottom and biology on the top. And on the bottom far left, you see the code of zeros and ones, the code of software and computing. Then there's a compiler. People write code, they actually don't type zeros and ones, they use a language. And then they run that on software, and that software runs on a computer, which is the hardware. Well, the same is true for us. We have our genetic code, GATC. Software is a chromosome, and we run it inside of our cells as hardware. But until now, biotech experts have been cutting and pasting the nucleotides, people like Craig Venter, in kind of like a ransom note, GATC. And this team realized that what's needed is a compiler. So they built one. So now you can drag and drop different parts of chromosomes into a string of DNA to create what you want. And you hit a button, and you send it, it goes off to another company called DNA 2.0, and they will send you your life form in a test tube. And right now it costs $45 per base pair for the code, so depending on how long a string. And the strings aren't that long. I think Craig Venter synthetically created poliovirus. I don't remember if it was, somebody here probably knows how many base pairs it was, 3 million or something. But we saw that curve, right? So we know the base pairs are 45 cents now. It's going down by a factor of 10, so it'll be 4.5 cents next year. The year after that, it'll be 1/10 the cost. And so you're at the point now where you can customize your life form and order it. This cat actually received some DNA from glow-in-the-dark jellyfish. And this one is being used for cancer research. But obviously, there are a host of implications and concerns when you have what is effectively the beginning of the computer industry being democratized, the same thing happening to innovators for biotech. And so this, obviously, we spend a lot of time discussing this at Singularity University, and it's a hot topic in general. One of the potentials is if we get cancer, you can have your tumor sequenced, because we're learning now that every tumor is different, and you can post that up on the web, and then hackers from around the world can sit down and try to hack your tumor. And we can crowdsource kind of therapies in a way we never could before. We're already seeing kind of crowdsourcing being able to address significant problems in a distributed way, in ways that we can't. Obviously, there's a flip side to this potential power being democratized, but until now, one thing we recognize is the advancement of technology has always brought risks with it. Until now, we've managed them. We have to continue to do that and be cognizant of that, while still retaining the benefits. So here's a long list of areas that are kind of accelerating this way, and they're converging and combining to create different opportunities. The Internet of Things is a hot topic. I talked about low-cost sensors. And the Internet used to be the domain of laptop computers. Now it's your phones, which there's expected to be 5 billion mobile phones connected to the Internet, which will kind of exceed the physical computers on the Internet. But ultimately, we're starting to see that all physical things are being connected to the Internet. So the lights in the building, and the heaters, through low-cost sensors everywhere, and my refrigerator, and my washing machine, right? And the video cameras. We're actually getting to the point now where certain companies of ours are starting to put sensors in clothing so you can get biofeedback and you can monitor your health. Things like your sleep, your pillow. And ultimately, it's expected that 50 billion physical things will be connected to the Internet. Both so we can gain information and we can gain control and efficiency. All of our cars are connected to the Internet now, the new cars, through navigation systems and other things. There's seats and all these other things. They collect data for safety. So that's going to create a whole world of opportunity for entrepreneurs as well, processing that data and trying to glean insights from it and value. Brain-computer interfaces is another very exciting area. And there's actual physical implants. Today, that will allow BrainGate is a company that will allow quadriplegics who are fully paralyzed to move a mouse on a computer screen. And they'll learn how to think certain thoughts and move the mouse. They can't speak, they never have, or at least since their accident. And now they can do all sorts of things, especially with the Internet of Things. They can change the lighting in the room, they can communicate, they can make phone calls from the computer with their brain, they can change the temperature in the room. All of these things, they can entertain themselves, watch TV, so it's completely liberating for them. We can think of other opportunities. But we don't need to actually implant the chip. These are examples of sensors that you just wear that will do things like detect your mood or simple thoughts. So one of these was demonstrated at a World Fair in Canada, where people sat in a chair and put it on, and they thought in different colors. And on the other side of Canada, a national bridge and a large skyscraper would change color based on the color they were thinking, and they had it connected in real time. You can imagine this built into your into your glasses, or something else that you wear, so that when you walk into your apartment, you can change the temperature, or it'll know what mood you're in and change the lighting. Larger machines are at the point now where they can read your thoughts, very simple thoughts. So if you think of a 5-letter word like house, there are machines today that if you put someone in, the machine will read those letters, H-O-U-S-C. So interesting to think about the implications for that. Artificial intelligence is an area that we're going to see more and more of, beyond Siri. And it's already been working in the background in a lot of different places. Airline industry, healthcare. Is anyone familiar with Watson? Who's familiar with Watson? Okay. So for those of you who are not familiar with Watson, this is a supercomputer built by IBM that defeated the 2 world champions in Jeopardy, which is a very challenging trivia game, partially because of the amount of data that you have to scan. Watson scanned 3 million pages in real time, and he had to find the answer before the other 2 could hit the button. What was really interesting about it is the way the questions are asked in Jeopardy. And you're given a question in a way that says, this person discovered a continent made of ice in this year and loved this food. And you have to answer, who is John Smith? And so there's some interpretation and nuance. And one of the hardest things for artificial intelligence to do is deal with language, especially slang and things like that. And that's actually where the real breakthrough here was for Watson. But look it up, watch the video, it's fascinating. And we can see that the opportunities there are places like healthcare. Doctors today cannot keep track of all the advances that are coming out. And when they see you and they see your symptoms, really they're running through their database of references for those combinations of symptoms. Well, they can't do that as well as a machine can. And a machine with global access to all of the medical advances that are coming out, and artificial intelligence can run that and supplement a doctor and give probabilities for new research that's come out that a doctor wouldn't know about. So we're going to start to see, first, artificial intelligence complement and support doctors, and eventually far exceed any physician's capability in diagnosis with confidence. Is everybody here familiar with the self-driving car, Google self-driving car? Okay, so for those of you who haven't, look it up, it's awesome. This car drives by itself on the roads. You pull up next to it. It's driven 500,000 kilometers across the US. It's been driving for a while now. Actually, they have a fleet of 12. They bring it to our classroom at Singularity University so students can see it, how it works. What's interesting is it's only had 2 accidents. One accident was when it was rear-ended by someone at a light. The second accident was when one of the engineers got in and took over the driving. Why does it have so few accidents? It uses this system called LiDAR, which sees 360 degrees at all times. You know, we only have 2 eyes in the front of our head. Moreover, it doesn't get tired, it doesn't text, it doesn't stop to eat or drink, it doesn't talk to the person next to it, it doesn't fall asleep. It's much better at driving than we are. And I think we'll get to the point, eventually, where we think it was barbaric that people were driving and were slamming into each other on the roads. These cars can speak to each other on the road, so they can drive very fast, very close to each other. They can speak all the way out to understand where the traffic is and how it's moving. So you get much more efficiency on the highways and less traffic. This is $75,000 today to mount to the top of a car. But once again, we talked about exponential decrease of costs. And eventually it'll be $300. And now you can think about the huge saved human lives globally from auto accidents, which are incredibly wasteful loss of human life. You can get in your car, you can drive if you're drunk, and you won't be driving, of course, the car will. Or you could just be productive. I mean, think about how much time we spend in our lives just going like this, which is really an incredible waste of human productivity. And so you can imagine getting in a car, you're doing your work all the way to work. There's a flip side to this, of course, which is taxi drivers, truck drivers, all these other jobs, right? They're going to be gone. You're not going to need them anymore. Trucks will just be driving themselves across the highways. And these things, they can see soccer balls, they can see babies step in front of them. I mean, they're really amazing. They've driven through cities, they've driven through all sorts of situations. And if you go online, you can see a blind person getting in one, and the blind person's taken around town and picks up their dry cleaning and does all these wonderful things. So, again, this is one of those things that goes from a few people having to a lot of people, and already I think the state of Nevada, not just California, state of Nevada, has issued licenses for self-driving cars. In terms of the jobs question, I think in 1900, 70% of the US was employed in agriculture or farming or related field, and now it's about 3%. And if you would have said to someone in 1900, by the way, in 2012, only 3% of people will be, all the agriculture jobs will be gone. That's what you say, all the agriculture jobs will be gone. They would have been like, oh, it's 70% of people. They would have freaked out. The world is going to end. And you would have said, no, don't worry about it. You're going to have jobs as web designers, and you're going to be doing nanotech and all these other things, right? And they would have looked at you like you were from outer space. But that's essentially what's going to happen. The jobs will be replaced by others. Not all of them, and that's one of the questions about the advancement of technology. So, those are the things we're working on. Those are the big opportunities that we see. And those are some of the universal laws that are driving what looks like random, chaotic innovation around the world. And now I'm going to switch gears for those of you who have startups to kind of practical lessons that you can use for your startups or any future startups that you have. I started my first company when I was 17, which was actually a pizza restaurant, and then I opened up a few of them. This was before the internet, so if you wanted to be an entrepreneur, you actually had to do it old school style. I went to university later at Duke and then Stanford. I worked on Wall Street, and then I eventually went to work with Richard Branson for 5 years, learning how he starts companies. It was a great opportunity in education. I worked at a venture firm, and now at Singularity University. So I've had the opportunity to see the process from the entrepreneur side, and having been an investor from the investment side. And these are some of the things I think that people often overlook, so I'm going to go through them. The first to remember is that entrepreneurship is a long-term game. It is a skill that you develop. It is a way of thinking. It is an art form. Think about it like golf or piano or anything else. You can try to do it, and you can get okay at it, but if you want to, you can study it, and more importantly, practice it, because you can't learn entrepreneurship from a book, like guitar or something. You have to actually practice it. But the other side is more important, which is people don't think about the long-term nature in two ways. One, in the US, there's a lot of data out there and advice about, don't do this and don't do that, and you're going to give away too much equity. And they get overly obsessed with optimizing. You don't want to optimize your first startup. You just want it to be successful. And if you come out owning 17% instead of 22, and you didn't fully optimize, who cares? Just be happy you're in the group of people that were successful. Because it's a long-term game, and you can optimize on the next one. Your job is to learn, and your job is to try to make it successful, and not worry so much about how successful. That's mostly in the US. In Russia, I see something else which is kind of interesting, which maybe it's not Russia as it is Europe and other places, where there's a fear, not a fear, but there's a social stigma associated with failure, right? And that really, and you have to drive that change in culture, right? You have to drive the value for failure, because I was in a couple of other cities before this. I was in Voronezh, and they were talking about failure and kept talking about Isaac Newton, and I said, look, Isaac Newton failed 1,000,000 times. Every scientist fails. If there was no ability to fail in your experiment, you would never do any experiments. And this is a science, and we're going to talk about, at the end of this, how it is more of a science. So go out there and get yourself a t-shirt that says, I fail, right? Because it's a statement about the fact that you're not trying. And we have a bunch of sayings, if you're not failing, you're not trying. But you have to drive that into the culture, because a long-term game requires that you fail a bunch of times so that you can get it right. And I'll show you some stories. One of the things that I see people, and for those of you who were showing projects last night, we saw this a couple times, make sure you have a very clear target. You know exactly who it is. So maybe it's the laid-off truck driver because of robotic cars. That's a very clear person. In the beginning, you may not know who it is, but try to figure it out who it is right away, because you need to get into the head of that person to understand the fundamental behavior change that you're creating. You have to create value for them. So if it's a gamer, what kind of gamer? Is it the older mother who plays Farmville, or is it the younger 14-year-old who's playing a whole different set of games? Which person are you going after? The more clarity you have around that, the higher probability you have of being successful. And so this means that you have to understand segmentation too. So you say, I'm going to go into the coat business or the online trading business, right? Well, then first understand, are there segmentations? Are there groups of people? Is it by price? Is there a $100 online trading system and a $5? Because those are two clear segments. So really understand the segments in your market, and then understand the person. So that will help you as a starting point, because you're solving their problem, right? And that's ultimately what's at the beginning of it, is find a problem that you're solving. This is another way to look at the landscape in the industry. So you look at the people, and then you say, okay, well, who's serving them? How is the industry broken up? And we're starting to get into competitive analysis here, but we're still not looking at the features. We're looking at two features of these companies. Right, so this is the cruise industry. When I worked for Virgin, one of the projects I worked on was Virgin Cruises. And on this vertical axis, you have basically, the bottom is basic and budget, and the top is kind of sophisticated, which you can almost think about as price, but it's more about the experience. And on the right is regimented, on the left is casual. So a lot of the cruise industry, you wore your tuxedo, and there were set times for dinner, and all these other things. And so you can map out, and you have to identify what are the two attributes that matter for your project, your company. In this case, it was sophistication and how relaxed it was. And there was this big spot on the left where there was no sophisticated but relaxed cruise lines. And we kind of saw this combination in the boutique hotel industry, right? So all the boutique hotels were cool, trendy, they were well designed, but they weren't formal. Like you think about the dress and the black tie functions, etc. And that's the space that we were going to go after. So we kind of understood what our positioning was. Then you can kind of get into looking at specific competitors and listing them and identifying more attributes. And competitors, entrepreneurs get a little lazy on the front end with specifically the competitive analysis. And you'll hear people say, oh, don't worry about what your competitors are doing. And that's true, but that's only after you understand and you've positioned yourself. You can never know too much about the competitive landscape, especially when you talk to an investor. That's where you're going to earn points. You understand the customer and how they think, and you understand, well, who else is serving them, and who's not serving them? How is my service going to be different than these others? And we're going to prove together, right, investor and entrepreneur, that the way you're going about it is going to be valuable to them. Meaning they're going to say yes and reach in their pockets and give you money. They're going to act, right? So spend more time on this and be able to talk about them at length, even without slides. Oftentimes, I'll have people pitch, and I will know competitors of their business in their heads that they won't know. And on a quick Google search, I can do a Google search and find competitors that weren't on their slides. And that's how you lose credibility. Here's another way of looking at the importance of the industry and landscape. This is the US healthcare industry. It is well known to be very complicated and messy and inefficient and overly expensive. And all of those are different players: physicians, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, laboratories. And so you need to understand, if you're going into this industry, who has the power, who's making the money, which one of these are growing, which one of these are gobbling up the other ones, which ones are facing certain government regulations and the other ones aren't. Because if you just do a startup in that space and you don't understand that, you're kind of going in a little blind. So one of the other things, you found your customer, you saw how people are serving them. Right now you're going to design your value proposition. You're going to design the way you're going to do it, what you're going to create. And here you want to be very, very clear about what the difference is and what the value is. This kind of person, the laid off driver, is going to do this because I'm going to offer them that. And on the far left you see an airplane. The one right next to it in the middle is the same airplane. And on the right, that's an ad for it. And at Virgin, what we clearly did here was we said, the one on the left feels like a bus. Nobody wants to ride in a bus. But they do want to hang out in a nightclub. So we combined a nightclub and a lounge with an airplane and wound up with something in the middle. And what's interesting about this is, I don't know if you can really see it, but first of all, she's dressed in nightclub clothing. The ad says, "Arrive beautifully," and it says, "Outlets at your seat." So the ad is supposed to be about outlets and power at your seat. But really, the ad is about the experience. And you see the lighting, you see her clothes, you see there's a man's boot there, and she's looking at him. So she's very clearly, there's some tension there. And then right behind her, you can't see it, but there's two people making out behind the seat. And if you just glance at the ad, you probably won't even see it. But ultimately, this is a statement about that experience and very clearly saying what we're offering that's different. This is actually what we did for new companies and products at Virgin, which is what was called the customer journey. And for every part of the experience, from the time someone saw an ad, to the time they bought their ticket, to the time they stepped on board, this one was for the cruise line. We highlighted every part of the experience, what was not good about it, how we could change it, and create. This is customer-centric design, right? User-centric design for products. But ultimately, when you do your business, identify the very first one. What is the very first thing you're going to approach them? And you're going to say, "I've got this for you," and they have to say yes. And that's the hypothesis you're going to prove. But be clear about it. This one led to a whole bunch of innovations, obviously, from the pool, VIP lounges, and restaurants, spas, etc. So, here's a diagram of a business where the game publisher in step one sells a video game to someone. And they make $5. They also sell advertising and they make another $2. And oftentimes when you talk to entrepreneurs and they have several factors and money flows in their business, they get distracted away from step one of the business. Startups are about having limited time and resources and being able to focus and prioritize. All that matters now first is step one. Is the person going to buy your video game? Don't start thinking about the advertising. Think about it for your business plan and then forget about it. And spend all your time validating your hypothesis. If I present this game, that person will buy it. It's important that you understand, with all the plans you have, what those essential few hypotheses buried in there are that will make you successful. So you can focus on those and you can get data on those. And if only 40% of the people are saying yes to the game when you present them versus 47, why? What's enough? Will they come back? How long do they stay before they quit? And so nail that first part before you move on to the second part, step by step. And you see people kind of get ahead of themselves where they're not collecting the right data on the first part. They don't know which ads they're placing are getting them the gamer, right? And they don't know what their channels of customer acquisition are. And so they don't have a model yet that works, and they're moving on. Everything I've been talking about is the design process. You understand the person, you have empathy, that's the customer, right? You define their problem, this person needs a new kind of game. You ideate, you come up with a solution, you prototype it, and you test it. And that's called product market fit. When that test works, when they say yes, and you've designed something that is needed and unique and differentiated and is valuable enough that they're going to give you money in the way you project it, that's product market fit. That's what you're trying to get to. You can worry about everything else later. It's validating the product. But what happens most times is it doesn't work right away. Or you get back something different than you thought. And that's when you have to go back through the process. And when you're going back through that process and you get your data, this is really an area where I see a lot of mistakes, not just in startups, but in large companies. Virgin did this too. I'll give you two examples here. A startup on the left is one called How Much, which was a game that would ask you how much somebody would have to pay you to do something. So how much to run out into the street naked, or how much to switch your religion, or it was all crazy fun stuff. But they would also ask, how much would you pay for someone to come to your job and change your oil in your car? Or how much would you pay for a month of unlimited coffee at Starbucks? And so it was collecting consumer research data. This is one of 3 entrepreneurs that I backed, starting at the same time, where I kind of gave him the concept, and he would be CEO, and he'd launched the product, and it was in TechCrunch, and then we didn't get a great response. So we talked about it, and then like after a few weeks, he quit. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, oh, it didn't take off. And I said, what do you mean it didn't take off? He said, it's not taking off. And I said, well, look at the data. There's 2 people in there who played this game 76 times. They played 76 questions. And they put a bunch of comments in the user testing about how they love it. I was like, who are those 2 people? Are they both sports fanatics? Are they both 35-year-old men who work in the finance industry? Your job is to understand who those 2 people are, figure out why they bought it, why the other ones didn't, and then either market to them or change it. Because it worked, it just didn't work for everybody. And that faulty logic about your hypothesis, you really as co-founders have to work with each other to make sure that there's no hidden assumptions in the conclusions you're making, and that you're understanding to segment the data you get back. Maybe it was how you posed the question, how you offered it to them. Maybe it's the user interface. And the only way you know is by digging in. I'll give you another example, which is Virgin. We know that mechanics in the US aren't always honest because they make money by selling you parts. So we were testing a new concept where you pay $25 a month and all your parts would be at cost. So the mechanic didn't make any money, they had to pass them through. And we asked a research firm to go research 8 cities on who would want to join this thing, and they came back and they said, oh, there's a problem. It turns out people really trust the mechanics, so you're going to have to really pay a lot to advertise and acquire customers. I stepped back and said, I've known my whole life that this is an issue on every news channel, and everybody talks about how they don't trust their mechanics. So what's going on? And when you read the report, there was a question in there that said, do you trust your mechanic? And a bunch of people said yes. And buried deeper in the report, there was another question which said, do you trust your mechanic to be honest and truthful at every stage? And then it was only 12% of people who said yes, right? So it turns out that the people interpreted the first question as, do you trust your mechanic is capable of fixing your car, that they're competent, not that they're honest. And when we got to the honest word, but of course they had glossed over that and made a lazy assumption, right? And big companies do this all the time, which is why people like Steve Jobs or Henry Ford or Richard Branson or others are very skeptical of consumer research data, especially when you're building something new. So be careful in your startup as well. Instead of trying to make conclusions right away, sit down with the customer and get to know your customer. Understand every single subtlety about the people who try your product. It is one of the best things you can do. And not enough people do this. They, again, make an assumption instead of talking to the people. I'll give you a great story here. Do people know Pinterest? Anybody know Pinterest here? It's like one of the hottest companies in the Valley right now. You get your pin boards. Okay, some people are using it. Well, Ben Silverman, who I worked with at a company before Virgin, created a predecessor to this called Tote, and it failed. And he was trying to get women to buy things on their mobile phones. And, people don't fail in the US, they say pivot. We pivoted. didn't work, so he changed it slightly, which says something itself about the culture, but he decided to pivot. But the first thing he did was he got completely obsessed with understanding why people weren't using tote. And he broke down their whole psychological decision process and which part and which button and how they think about it and what they like doing. And all he did was he created this pin board, and he took the same things he was showing them that people were swiping across, but put them in this pin board manner. And that one little different thing turned into one of the hottest startups in the US and took off, and they're saying it's going to change the way people shop, because now people are shopping based on these pin boards. How subtle is that? It's like how you present it, right? But Ben was obsessed with it, and actually his first investor after Tote failed stayed with him, and is in this interview saying, I stayed with him because he understood the customer better than anybody I ever met, and so I knew he was going to be successful eventually. Here's another one, which is, this is OMG Pop, and it was purchased by Zynga recently, which is a huge game manufacturer who makes Farmville and all these other games. And OMG Pop is interesting because it's a good example of really not only staying with your priorities, but being persevering. And as companies run out of resources, this company had been around for 6 years, longer than that. This guy worked at Virgin with me, the CEO, not the founder. He left Virgin and became the CEO here. And then he built 35 games, and they all failed. And so after 6 years of being there, he was out of money. In fact, they had less than 30 days cash in the bank. And he had put a sign on everyone's desk with the date they run out of money. And my other friend had lunch with him, and he said, my investors won't call me back. My board of directors won't call me back. We have less than 30 days cash. The only thing I can do is I have this one game that I'm working on, and I've stopped everything I'm doing, and I only work on the one game. And I told everybody in the company to stop what they're doing, and they only work on the one game. And that game was Draw Something, which he launched a few weeks before his company ran out of money. It became a huge hit, and was like 250,000 downloads a day, was making a ton of money, and he was purchased for $180 million. It's a great story because before he got bought by Zynga, he hired back all the people that he had to lay off right before the end so that they would participate in the acquisition of the company. But he's got a joke, which is 6 years, 35 attempts, and $180 million overnight. And so that is a story in iterating and failing, and it's a story in how to work with few resources at the end. I mean, this is like a movie where someone's really staring into darkness at the end, right? Into the abyss as an entrepreneur. And now he's being interviewed everywhere, of course. They had $1,700 US in the bank. What is it, 51,000 rubles left when they got acquired. It's amazing. This company was one of three that started with the other one that I mentioned, How Much, where the guy quit the CEO. This woman, first-time entrepreneur, no technology background, no entrepreneurship background. She didn't work at Google. She didn't have any connections. And she created a company that profiled neighborhoods. So if you were moving from here to Berlin, you could figure out all the neighborhoods and what kind of people live there. What is the culture? The qualitative, not just the data. And she didn't get any funding. So she had no money. She convinced people to work with her for free. She convinced her partners to give her data for free. And she kept the company alive for 3 years just by being passionate and believing in it and convincing others to do the same. And now it's on the 13th is the announcement the company is acquired by a big company in Silicon Valley whose name you will know. And it was a great example of 3 companies where 2 people had a little more experience. They both quit. She stuck with it, found a way to be successful, and just kept iterating and trying. I'm going to close by saying there is no better time to be an entrepreneur in the history of the world. All of this information, all of these lessons that were learned are all being codified into books and blogs and incubators. There's great information. These are books you should read if you want to be an entrepreneur. Business Model Generation, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Lean Startup by Eric Ries is the scientific method applied to entrepreneurship. And I think back to what it was like 10 and 20 years ago and the way it is today. and you really have the tools and the knowledge and the support in a way that was never before. Of course, funding is still a problem, but there's even new funding methods like crowdfunding. And if you have a product now, you can pre-sell it. Places like Kickstarter, where you're not only getting feedback from potential customers about whether they like it or not, and that's not research, right? That's real. Because in research, it's kind of like, oh, would you buy this product if I sold it to you? And people say yes. That data is not as accurate as if I said, will you buy this? And they actually buy it, right? Because people's intention versus their action doesn't always line up. So you're getting real feedback, but more importantly, your customers are becoming your investors. So you don't actually have to give equity away. And there's a whole bunch of other things that are coming down the road as opportunities for entrepreneurs explodes. So for those of you who do want to pursue it, congratulations, and stay connected and support each other, and come visit us at Singularity University, singularityU.org. Спасибо.